Today is the story of John C. Woods, the hangman who was terrible at his job, and why that might have been a good thing. John Clarence Woods was a United States Master Sergeant and also the executioner for the US military. And I'm going to go through how he got in that position and how he probably lied to get there. So there's not a lot about his childhood. All we have is that he was born in 1911 in Wichita, Kansas. The story picks up again when Woods joined the US Navy in 1929. Although this did not go well for him. After a few months, he went AWOL and no one could find him. When Woods eventually returned, he was convicted by a court-martial and examined by a psychiatric board. Now here's a direct writing from when he was examined. This patient, though not intellectually inferior, gives a history of repeatedly running counter to authority both before and since enlistment. Stigmata of degeneration are present and the patient frequently bites his fingernails. He has a benign tumor on the soft palate for which he refuses operation. His commanding officer and division officers state that he shows inaptitude and does not respond to instructions. He is obviously poor service material. This man has had less than 5 months service. His disability is considered to be an inherent defect, for which service is in no way responsible. He is not considered a menace to himself or others. The psychiatric board gave him the diagnosis of psychopathic inferiority without psychosis, which is basically a bullshit diagnosis. It was more that they needed an excuse to kick him out because he really sucked. But with this diagnosis, he was dishonorably discharged. So after the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor and the US military went into World War II, John C. Woods somehow ended up back in the military. Woods enlisted in the Army in August 1943 and was assigned to Company B of the 37th Engineer Combat Battalion, 5th Engineer Special Brigade. So somehow he had got in without them noticing he had already been discharged from the Navy. I guess maybe the Navy and the Army did not communicate that well. But either way, he was now in the Army. So it's not known entirely, but Woods probably participated in the D-Day landings of Omaha Beach. Now obviously this shook him up a little bit. He did not enjoy this combat experience, and I don't think anybody would. So at this point he was trying to find any way not to go back into combat. At this time the US military was looking to have someone volunteer as the Army's hangman. And John Woods saw his opportunity to get out of battle. So you may be wondering, why does the US military even need a hangman? And the answer is actually kind of obvious. Military personnel commit crimes too. So when soldiers would kill innocent people, or R-word innocent people, they would be tried and hung if they were guilty. This was a way for the US military to show that they took disciplining their soldiers very seriously. They did not want war crimes to happen. They did not support any kind of violence that wasn't justified. Now, is this something they really cared about, or was this something that they just needed to do for their image? That's not really up for me to decide, and that's out for debate. Either way, they would hang military members who committed heinous crimes. Now, John Woods saw this new position as hangman as a ticket away from the front lines. John Woods claimed that he was an assistant hangman for 2 cases in Texas and 2 cases in Oklahoma. This is almost certainly a lie. At this time in Texas and Oklahoma, they had changed the means of execution. They were using electrocution and not hanging people. The last hanging actually took place in 1923 in Texas. So this would have made John Woods 12 years old when it happened. So yeah, he lied to get the job, but I think all of us have done that at some point. So up until this point, I haven't really talked about the general demeanor of Woods, but it seems like for the most part, he was rather unpleasant. He was short, unkempt, seemed like he didn't shower, was dirty all the time, was drunk all the time. He was a bit of a mess. And here's a quote of Herman J. Overmeyer, who knew Woods. John Woods was a short, muscular sort of man, and I describe him as kind of the world's flotsam. He taught the language of the hobos and flotsams, and the people who do these kind of jobs. So he basically described him as like a derelict homeless person. Woods also seemed to have a problem with alcohol, which did not help his skills as being a hangman. He also seemed to have an unwavering confidence in a field that he knew nothing about. He claims to have used and invented 10 different hangman knots. And I think he maybe should have stuck to the tried and true knot because his hangs did not go well. So if you didn't know, when someone is hung, it's supposed to snap their neck. With his hangings, most of the time, the people would fall and it wouldn't break their neck, and then they'd just slowly suffocate for several minutes. He didn't weigh or measure the people he was executing. He also didn't measure the length of the rope to see if it was right for snapping their neck. So he was just like winging it the entire time. Between 1944 and 1945, he hanged at least 34 American soldiers. And at least 11 of those executions did not go well. Now, where Woods' career really took off was after World War II. Because of course, they had lots of Nazis to hang. He executed 14 Nazis who committed crimes at the Dachau concentration camp over 2 days. But where he gained most of his fame was the execution of the Nuremberg 10. So if you didn't know, the Nuremberg trials were a series of trials against the high-ranking Nazi officials. And it's probably the most famous and talked about event for persecuting the Nazis. Now, believe it or not, it was actually controversial to send the Nazis to trial, because there was really no precedent on people who committed crimes in a state where these weren't crimes. So this was a case of international law and how they should persecute people who did things that were viewed as objectively wrong. But then there's the concern that if they were doing things that weren't illegal in their system at that time, is it fair to retrospectively punish them? I think it was pretty clear at the time that the Nazis had committed very horrific acts, and that it would be more of a crime to let them walk free than to persecute them. Now, our protagonist here, John C. Woods, he decided to build the gallows for the hangings. And it's not known if this was entirely on purpose or a mistake, but he made the trapdoors on the gallows really small. So when the Nazis were hanged, they would often fall and just smack their face off the edge of the trapdoor. And it's up for debate whether he did this on purpose as a last form of punishment, or he was just really bad at his job. So apparently on the day of the executions, Woods showed up late, probably drunk, with his outfit all disheveled. On this day, he was set to hang 10 high-ranking Nazi officials. Now, from eyewitness accounts when the hangings started, a lot of them were completely botched. It's said that Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel, chief of the High Command of the Armed Forces, reportedly took 28 minutes to finally choke to death. So he was hanged, and then it took a whole 28 minutes for him to actually die. It was reported that there was not enough room for the men to drop, so they would not snap their neck and then die of strangulation. And of course, some of them were also smacking their face on the trapdoor on the way down. So these executions were going terribly, and like I said in the beginning, maybe this was a good thing, because no one really cared if these Nazis were dying a peaceful death or a terrible one. Now, when it comes to the execution of Julius Streicher, there are some interesting quotes about exactly what happened. Julius Streicher was a Nazi who was the publisher of an anti-Semitic magazine. Now here's a quote from Kingsbury Smith, who was a correspondent with the International News Service, reporting on the execution of Julius Streicher. When the rope snapped taut with the body swinging wildly, groans could be heard from within the concealed interior of the scaffold. Finally, the hangman, who had descended from the gallows platform, lifted the black canvas curtain and went inside. Something happened that put a stop to the groans and brought the rope to a standstill. After it was over, I was not in the mood to ask what he did, but I assumed that he grabbed the swinging body and pulled down on it. We were all of the opinion that Streicher had strangled. So it appears Woods took matters into his own hands in that execution. When the last Nazi was pronounced as dead, Woods was quoted as saying, "10 men in 103 minutes, that's fast work. Never saw a hanging go off any better," which is a pretty hilarious quote after all the hangings were pretty much botched. Now, after these trials, Woods became a little bit of a mini celebrity and was interviewed in various magazines. And here's another quote from Woods in one of these magazines. "I hanged those 10 Nazis and I am proud of it. I wasn't nervous. A fellow can't afford to have nerves in this business. I want to put a good word in for the GIs who helped me. They all did swell. I'm trying to get them a promotion. The way I look at the hanging job, somebody has to do it. I got into it kind of by accident years ago in the States, which we know is a lie." So after the hangings of a bunch of Nazis and after World War II, there were many more people to hang in the military. So Woods' job kind of slowed down, but it's said he's credited with executing 92 men in total in his career. Now, another hilarious thing is Woods had a wife, and the first time that she heard he was a hangman was in the newspapers for Nuremberg. He had not told her during his entire career. She had no idea that her husband was hanging people in the military. She just thought he was some soldier. And I think that checks out to the kind of character he is, that he would not even mention it. So at this point, they didn't really need a hangman, so he ended up just working pretty much as maintenance at a military base. Then on July 21st, 1950, he was asked to go change a light bulb on a pair of lights. Now, for whatever reason, these lights were in an area where there was knee-deep water, and I guess he screwed up somehow because he was electrocuted to death. I'm not joking, that's how he died. He was electrocuted by accident at the age of 39 years old. And from looking at pictures of him when he's probably in his 30s, he's the oldest looking 30-year-old I've ever seen. I think this man just looked middle-aged his entire life. So yeah, that's the interesting story of John C. Woods. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more videos like this, please subscribe. Thank you for watching.